friends. Thank you for joining us here today at the Well, a Grace Encounter. Today I want to take us into a passage from Paul's letter to the Hebrew believers in Jesus. The passage that we're going to look at is from the 12th chapter, which begins in the King James Version with this word, therefore. Therefore is a conjunctive opening word, and it begs that we grasp the preceding phrase or statement for context. In other words, before we can intellectually benefit from this next truth that we're about to consider today, we've got to have an understanding of the preceding truth that properly sets up this next truth for today. So we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12, which follows Hebrews chapter 11. Thanks, Captain Obvious. Did you figure that out all on your own? Well, I said that because if you're somewhat familiar with your Bible, then you know that the 11th chapter of Hebrews is all about faith. And in fact, it's about a certain kind of faith that's called now faith. Now faith is not yesterday's faith. Now faith is not tomorrow when I get through this, then I'll have faith. It's now faith, present faith. And it's not to be confused with this diluted acquiescence of, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But rather, Hebrews chapter 11 speaks about the kind of faith that pleases God. It's the kind of faith that is absolutely convinced in the inevitability of whatever God says. It's the kind of faith that gives substance to the things that you hope. It produces evidence. So the phrase, I'll believe it when I see it, isn't now faith. It's actually no faith. But contrary to a more contemporary retort that says, well, you'll see it when you believe it, now faith is not that way. And the reason I can make that statement is for all of the descriptive list of faith that Hebrews 11 introduces, it concludes with this phrase. And people that passionately or enthusiastically talk about faith will quote the early parts of Hebrews chapter 11, but chapter 11 closes with this statement in verse 39 and 40. Not one of these people, remember this is this great list of people, it describes this now faith and then a great list of examples, and it says not one of these people, even though their lives of faith were exemplary, got their hands on what was promised. God had a better plan for us, that their faith and our faith would come together and make one completed whole, that their lives of faith are not complete apart from ours. Now, Paul doesn't use that word better casually, because elsewhere Paul speaks of a better covenant, which is based on better promises. And the list of people of great faith that he mentions in this passage all lived under an old covenant types and shadows, but we live under the fulfillment. And the fulfillment is in Jesus Christ. He is the fulfillment of all the old covenant types and shadows. The Passover lamb in Egypt was Jesus Christ. The bronze serpent that was lifted up in the wilderness and brought healing was Jesus Christ. He is the sacrifice of peace, the peace offering. So all of their faith was in shadows, and it's not complete apart from ours, which is based on Jesus Christ in us as the hope of glory. So now, this now faith doesn't necessarily mean that you'll see it when you believe it. That's a quip, but that's not necessarily what it means. What it means is you believe it. Period. Whether or not you ever see it, you just believe it. And if I'm going to polish up our phraseology here before we launch into the study for today, we're not really even talking about believing it. You ever hear anybody ask a pregnant woman, what is it? Well, it's not even an it. We're not talking about believing in it. We're talking about believing him, the person of Jesus Christ in us. And that's the really only sure foundation for anyone's faith. So, with the understanding that this solid God-pleasing faith doesn't always see what it believes, now we go into our chapter 12 that begins this way in verse 1. Therefore, in other words, because of what we just refreshed ourselves in, therefore we also, with them, we also, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and that's that great faith group that was just mentioned, this cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that's set before us. The Apostle Paul is painting a picture, if you will, of life as a race. And it's as if it's in some amphitheater, and that the grandstands are filled with this company of people of great faith that went before us. And most of those that are listed there, all of those, were from the old covenant system and times. And this is the group of people in the grandstands that have passed the baton on to us, if you will. Their life is complete on this earth, and it's our turn to run this race. And they're in the stands cheering us on because they ran in the shadows. We're running in the light of the Son, Jesus Christ. Now, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 9:24. He says, run to win. A lot of people run. Only one wins. Run to win. I think that Christians can sometimes be some of the busiest people that they are. They are running hither and yon. They're going everywhere, trying to get in on things. And if you want to understand things that are common in life, you just don't want to be busy. You just don't want to run. You got to understand some things that they're common, but that don't help you run this race of faith. So Paul in chapter 12 here first mentions laying aside weights. Weights are things, sometimes runners that are in training will put weights on their ankles. Sometimes they'll hold weights in their hands to help them while they're training. But you don't see a runner in a race actually having the weights on. They never run with the weights during the actual race. Do you think that you could outrun somebody in any kind of race, that you could outrun them if you were carrying a piano? I don't think you could run if you were carrying a piano. In fact, I don't think you could carry a piano, but you could try it. But likely, even though we couldn't lift a piano, there's a lot of people that are going through life and they're carrying stuff that's not as obvious as a piano, something less obvious. They go through life carrying baggage. And you may not want the baggage. And understand that baggage is, or what Paul is calling weights, isn't sin. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not necessarily sinful. It's not helpful. It's not going to help you run or live this life of faith. It won't be beneficial in running to win. Okay? So Paul goes on and he says, lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily besets us. So he does include sins. And what I'd like you to understand is that all of your sin was paid for by Jesus Christ. And if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, then you are forgiven. Now, that doesn't mean that you get to live any way that you desire, as if there's no consequence anymore because of Jesus. If you're a believer in Jesus, your sins were paid, you're forgiven, but any weight or any sin won't help you run the race. It won't help you run to win. I used to hear a lot of Christians say, can I do this and still get to heaven? Who cares? Will that help you run this race? Help you run to win? Or will it bog you down? If it doesn't build your faith, lay it aside. So the Message translation of this verse I'm reading in Hebrews chapter 12 says, Do you see what this means? All these pioneers blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on. It means we'd better get on with it. Strip down, start running, and never quit. No superficial spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Goes on in verse 2 to say, keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race that we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed. That exhilarating finish in and with God, he could put up with anything along the way, the cross, the shame, whatever. And now he's there in the place of honor, right alongside of God. So when you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item, that long litany of hostility he plowed through, and that will shoot adrenaline into your souls. Friends, if running to win, if living a life of faith involves laying aside weights, baggage, not necessarily sinful, but things that just bog you down, weights and sin, and we already know how easy it is to get tripped up in those things, and then keeping our eyes, we're supposed to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus Christ, then wisdom would say that you can expect subtle, even concerted efforts to distract you. Maybe similar to Peter, who was walking on the water until he took his eyes off of Jesus and he began to sink. Friends, circumstances, concerns, imaginations, other people, even the enemy of your soul are all potential distractions. I read this post today that the fastest way to kill a person's vision is to give them a second vision, division, distracted. So the picture that we're being painted today is of a faith race, and the stands are filled with those who've run this race before us, though they did it with inferior guidelines. We're under a new and better covenant. And out in front of us is Jesus Christ, and his eyes were fixed on the prize. He wasn't focused on the pain of the cross, the shame of the cross. Why are you guys doing this to me? I only came to help you. And our eyes have got to be fixed steadfastly on Jesus Christ, just as his were. He completed and fulfilled his purpose, and he won the prize, and now he's seated at the right hand of God. But I'd like you to consider something as we're looking in Hebrews chapter 12. It goes on to say that Jesus is the author and the finisher of our faith. That phrase has spoken life to me for many years. The author and the finisher of our faith tells me that no one can write the end over your life except the author, just the author. Currently, author Julian Fellows is who's authored this huge TV hit, Downton Abbey, is bringing it into a close, and a lot of the people that are really captivated by that series are saying, no, don't let it end. But oftentimes in life, it's exactly the other way around, where, like David, there's a lot of people that say, it's over for you. Finito. You're finished. You're hopeless. And the fact is, friends, that no one gets to write the end over your life except the author. No circumstances, no imagination, no person, not even you. You may face things that you think, man, that's it. I've made a mistake. I've made an error. I turned the wrong corner. It doesn't have to be anything sinful, but it's just, you have turned down a dead-end alley, and God has a way of turning the page and starting a new chapter. Only he can write the end. You've maybe heard the phrase from Genesis, as long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest. And in between every seed and the harvest thereof is this thing called time. Well, what I want to submit to you today is that similarly, in between the author and his pronouncement that it's finished, the end, is an adversary that's bent on getting you to grind to a halt, throw in the towel, look at the finish line so far away and other people that are way out ahead of you and just trot off to the side and give up. Get you distracted with the pain or the shame, the disappointment, and get you to take your eyes off of the prize. Have you ever heard of teachers say, well, wow, school would really be great if it just wasn't for the students? Hopefully that's just teacher lounge banter and that they don't really mean that. Well, Pamela and I built and established a very successful bed and breakfast. And we had a staff of cleaning people, housemaids that would help us. And it actually took a lot of effort on their part and on Pamela's part, my part, to make that whole experience look idyllic and effortless for the guests. And one day, one of our housemaids was bemoaning this endless cycle of cleaning up mountains of laundry and piles of dishes. Said, we just did this yesterday, we're doing it again. And I quoted a verse to this young gal from Proverbs 14:4. Without oxen, a stable stays clean. But you need a strong ox for a large harvest. And I reminded them if it wasn't for messy guests, they wouldn't have a job. Point made, point taken. They never complained about that again. Well, I wasn't looking for mess. Jesus wasn't looking for the pain. He wasn't looking for the shame of the cross. His eyes were on the glory of a Father, and nothing was going to distract him from fulfilling that purpose. So let me wrap this text up again in Hebrews 12 in the Message that says, do you see what this means? All of these pioneers who blazed the way, all of these veterans cheering us on, it means we'd better get on with it. Strip down, start running, and never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it. Because he never lost sight of where he was headed, that exhilarating finish in and with God, he could put up with anything along the way. Cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there, in the place of honor right alongside God. When you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item. That long litany of hostility he plowed through, and that will shoot adrenaline into your souls. Friends, Jesus is the author and the finisher of your faith. And maybe you are currently going through something, and you can so identify with David, many there be which say of my soul, there's no hope for him in God. And maybe you're thinking, man, I just need to give up. I am so far behind in this race, I just need to give up. Friends, he is the author, and only the author can write it's finished. But don't be surprised. In the middle, in the midst of your life, which, I've said this before, almost all of our life is lived in the middle. We were born as babies, and one day we will come as little children unto the Father. But almost all of our life is lived in the middle. And in the middle, there are people, circumstances, events that can try to distract you and get you to just give up, get you to focus on the pain and on the disappointment. And friends, it's right here. Now faith, the kind that wins the race, keeps your eyes fixed on Jesus Christ. He went through it. Look how he did it. Learn how he lived his life. And let that author be the one that turns a page for you today and writes a new chapter, a new beginning, not the end, not until he's ready. Pray God bless you today. And once again, just thank you for being a part of this ministry with us. God bless you.